The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's funeral home like bullets against glass. I stood in the corner of the viewing room, watching relatives I hadn't seen in years whisper among themselves while casting disapproving glances in my direction. My father's casket sat at the front of the room, surrounded by flowers that cost more than most people make in a month. I adjusted my tie for the 100th time, feeling completely out of place in my discount suit among the sea of designer clothing. 5 years. 5 years since I'd spoken to my father, and now he was gone forever. Well, look who decided to show up. I turned to see my sister Victoria approaching, her heels clicking against the polished floor like a countdown timer. She wore a black Chanel dress that probably cost more than my rent, and her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't show a single strand out of place despite the humidity. Victoria. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. Don't Victoria, me Michael. You have some nerve showing up here after what you did to this family. Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut steel. Do you have any idea what you put Dad through? The embarrassment? The shame. I felt my jaw clench. I came to pay my respects. He was still my father. Was he? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because from what I remember, you made it pretty clear you wanted nothing to do with this family when you stormed out 5 years ago. The memory hit me like a physical blow. The screaming match in Dad's study. The accusations. The way he'd looked at me like I was a complete stranger when I told him I couldn't be part of his business anymore. The way he'd called me a disappointment and said I'd never amount to anything without the family name. That's not how it happened, and you know it, I said quietly. Oh please. Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. You threw a tantrum because Dad wouldn't let you turn his construction company into some hippie environmental crusade. You chose your principles over your family, Michael. Actions have consequences. Around us, the murmur of conversations continued, but I could feel eyes on us. Our cousin James had stopped talking to his wife and was watching our exchange with obvious interest. Aunt Margaret was pretending to read her program while clearly eavesdropping. I tried to make things right, I said. I called him dozens of times over the years. He never returned a single call. Because you burned that bridge when you left. Victoria's voice rose slightly before she caught herself and glanced around. She moved closer, lowering her voice to barely above a whisper. And now you think you can just waltz back in here and pretend like nothing happened? Well, I have news for you, little brother. She leaned in so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the faint scent of cigarettes she thought no one knew about. You're cut out, she whispered, her words dripping with satisfaction. Completely. Dad made sure of that before he died. So whatever fantasy you have about reconciliation or forgiveness, you can forget it. You made your choice 5 years ago and now you have to live with it. I felt the blood drain from my face. What are you talking about? The will, Michael. You're not in it. Not a penny, not a photograph, nothing. Dad left everything to me. Her smile was cold and triumphant. The company, the house in Malibu, the estate in Connecticut, all of it. You chose to walk away from this family, so now the family is walking away from you. The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out the soft organ music and hushed conversations. 5 years of hoping that maybe, someday we could work things out. 5 years of believing that despite everything, blood was still blood. He wouldn't do that, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was wrong. My father was many things, but forgiving wasn't one of them. When someone crossed him, they stayed crossed. Oh, he would and he did. Victoria's satisfaction was palpable. Mr. Thompson from Dad's law firm will be reading the will tomorrow at 10. You're welcome to attend if you enjoy public humiliation, but I wouldn't recommend it. She started to turn away, then stopped and looked back at me with mock sympathy. You know, Michael, this could have all been avoided if you'd just done what was expected of you. If you'd just been a good son instead of a self-righteous idealist. I was trying to save the company, I said, my voice barely audible. Those environmental violations would have destroyed us eventually. And instead, your whistle-blowing destroyed your relationship with Dad. Congratulations on your moral victory. She paused, studying my face with clinical interest. You look tired, by the way. Life hasn't been kind to you, has it? Still living in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn? Still working for that nonprofit that pays you in good feelings instead of actual money? I didn't respond. There was no point. I thought so. Victoria smoothed down her dress and checked her reflection in the window. Well, I have actual family members to speak with. People who didn't abandon Dad when he needed them most. As she walked away, I stood there feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. Around me, the funeral continued as if nothing had happened. People shared memories, comforted each other, talked about what a great man my father had been. But all I could hear was Victoria's voice echoing in my head. You're cut out. I made my way to the casket, ignoring the whispers that followed me. My father looked smaller than I remembered, older. The angry, imposing man who had built a construction empire from nothing looked almost fragile in his expensive suit. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered. I'm sorry we couldn't find a way to fix this. But even as I said the words, I felt the old anger rising in my chest. Sorry for what? For trying to prevent the company from cutting corners on safety? For refusing to look the other way when contractors were dumping chemicals in protected wetlands? For having a conscience? I thought about the last conversation we'd had, the one that ended everything. I'd come to him with evidence that our subcontractors were using substandard materials, that people could get hurt. Instead of thanking me, he'd accused me of being naive, of not understanding how the real world worked. You think you're better than me, he'd said, his face red with rage. You think you're some kind of saint, but you're just a fool. This business built everything you've ever had, put you through college, gave you opportunities most people can only dream of, and this is how you repay me? By trying to destroy it? I tried to explain, tried to make him understand that I wasn't trying to destroy anything, just fix the problems before they became disasters. But he wouldn't listen. The argument had escalated until finally, in frustration and hurt, I'd said the words I'd regretted for 5 years. If that's what you think of me, then maybe I don't belong in this family. Maybe you don't, he'd replied without hesitation. And that was it. 5 years of silence. 5 years of birthday cards returned to sender and Christmas invitations that never came. 5 years of telling myself that eventually, we'd both cool down and find a way back to each other. Now it was too late. I took one last look at my father's face and turned to leave, pushing through the crowd of mourners toward the exit. The rain was coming down harder now and I didn't have an umbrella. As I stepped outside, the cold water hit my face like a slap, mixing with tears I didn't realize I was shedding. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my girlfriend Lisa, back in Brooklyn. How did it go? Are you okay? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, it's over. I'll explain when I get home. But as I walked to my rental car, something nagged at me about Victoria's words. She'd seemed too pleased, too confident. In all our years growing up together, Victoria had never been good at hiding her emotions when she was lying. She'd get this little twitch in her left eye, a tell that had gotten her in trouble countless times as a kid. And today, when she told me I was cut out of the will, her left eye had been twitching like crazy. The law offices of Thompson, Bradley and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming tower in downtown Hartford. I sat in the parking garage at 9:45 a.m., gripping the steering wheel and trying to decide if I should go upstairs or just drive back to New York. Victoria had been right about one thing. This would be public humiliation. The entire extended family would be there, witnessing my final exclusion from the family legacy. But something about her behavior at the funeral kept bothering me. That twitch. The way she'd been almost too eager to tell me I was cut out. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Lisa's name appeared on the screen. Hey, I answered. Michael, you don't have to do this to yourself, she said without preamble. Come home. We'll order Chinese food and watch terrible movies and forget about all of them. I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes. Lisa knew the whole story, had listened to me agonize over the situation with my father for the 3 years we'd been together. She'd been the one to convince me to attend the funeral in the first place, arguing that I'd regret it forever if I didn't. I know I don't have to, I said. But I need to. I need to hear it officially, you know? Otherwise, I'll always wonder. Wonder what? Whether your father was capable of being even crueler than you thought. Wonder if there's something I'm missing. Victoria seemed, I don't know, too happy about it. Like she was overplaying her hand. Lisa sighed. Or maybe she was just enjoying finally being the favored child for once. Michael, your father spent 5 years ignoring you. What makes you think death changed anything? She had a point. But I'd already driven 3 hours from the city, and something in my gut told me I needed to see this through. I have to go, I said. I'll call you afterward. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt like it took forever. When the doors opened, I was greeted by a receptionist with a kind smile and graying hair. You must be Michael, she said warmly. I'm Mrs. Patterson. Your father spoke about you often. I blinked in surprise. He did. Oh yes. He was very proud of your environmental work, you know. He kept newspaper clippings about that toxic waste cleanup you organized in Queens. She smiled sadly. Such a shame about the family troubles. Mr. Hamilton always hoped you two would work things out. Before I could process this information fully, she was leading me down a hallway lined with expensive artwork and family photos. We stopped at a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Connecticut River. The room was already full. Victoria sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking every inch the grieving heiress in a conservative black suit. Around the table were faces I recognized from family gatherings: Uncle Robert and Aunt Margaret, Cousin James and his wife Patricia, my father's business partner Frank Morrison, and several others. The conversations died as I entered the room. Victoria looked up with barely concealed annoyance. "Michael," she said coolly, "I'm surprised you decided to come." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, taking the only empty seat at the far end of the table. An elderly man in an expensive suit cleared his throat from the front of the room. "If we could all take our seats, I'd like to begin. I'm Harold Thompson, and I've been the Hamilton family attorney for 37 years. We're here today for the reading of the last will and testament of Charles Hamilton." He opened a thick folder and pulled out several documents. "Before we begin with the specific bequests, I want to address something that may come as a surprise to some of you." Victoria shifted in her chair, that little muscle in her left eye starting to twitch. "Charles came to see me 6 months ago to make some significant changes to his will. These changes were made after considerable thought and consultation, and they represent his final wishes." My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "To my daughter Victoria," Thompson continued, "who has stood by me through difficult times and managed the day-to-day operations of Hamilton Construction with skill and dedication, I leave my personal effects, my collection of vintage cars, and the house in Malibu, valued at approximately $2.3 million. Victoria's face went white. "What about the company? What about the Connecticut estate?" Thompson held up a hand. "Please let me finish." He turned to a new page. "To my business partner Frank Morrison, I leave 49% of Hamilton Construction, with the understanding that the company's direction will continue to prioritize both profitability and environmental responsibility." Frank looked as shocked as everyone else. Charles never mentioned. "And finally," Thompson's voice grew stronger, "to my son Michael, who had the courage to stand up for what he believed was right, even when it cost him his relationship with his family, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes 51% of Hamilton Construction, giving him controlling interest in the company, as well as the family estate in Connecticut, valued at approximately $8.7 million. The room exploded. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair clattering backward. "That's impossible," she screamed. "He told me Michael was cut out completely. He promised me." Thompson's expression remained calm. "Your father never promised you anything of the sort, Victoria. In fact, he specifically asked me to tell you that he had done so as a test of your character." "A test?" Victoria's voice cracked. "What kind of test?" "He wanted to see how you would treat your brother if you believed he had been disinherited. He was hoping you would show compassion, perhaps even defend him to other family members." Thompson looked genuinely sad. "Unfortunately, your reaction at the funeral convinced him that his decision was correct." The blood drained from Victoria's face as the implications hit her. "You mean he was watching? He planned this?" "Your father made these arrangements months ago, but he asked several family friends to observe your interactions with Michael at the funeral. Their reports confirmed his fears about your character." Uncle Robert stood up, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. Charles was obviously not in his right mind when he made these changes. We'll contest this." "You're certainly free to try," Thompson replied. "However, I should mention that your brother underwent extensive psychological evaluation before making these changes. 3 separate doctors confirmed his complete mental competency. Additionally, the will was witnessed by multiple parties and recorded on video." He turned to me and I realized I hadn't breathed in about 2 minutes. "Michael, your father also left you this letter to be read privately. But he asked me to share one paragraph with everyone present." Thompson pulled out a separate sheet of paper and began to read in my father's unmistakable voice, somehow captured in the formal words. "To those who may question my decision to leave the majority of my estate to my son Michael, let me be clear. He was the only one with the courage to tell me when I was wrong. He was willing to sacrifice his relationship with me rather than compromise his principles. That is the kind of integrity I built this company to embody, and that is the kind of person who should lead it into the future. My only regret is that it took me 5 years to swallow my pride and admit he was right." Victoria sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Around the table, family members whispered among themselves, their shock evident. "There are additional provisions," Thompson continued, including a college fund for any future children in the family, continued health insurance for all employees, and a requirement that Hamilton Construction implement the environmental safety protocols that Michael originally proposed. I felt like I was in a dream. This couldn't be real. My father, the man who had called me a disappointment and refused to speak to me for 5 years, had left me everything? I don't understand, I managed to say. Why didn't he ever call me? Thompson's expression softened. Your father was a proud man, Michael. He knew he had been wrong, but he couldn't bring himself to admit it directly. He hoped that someday you would come to him, and he could make amends without having to acknowledge his mistake. But I did try to call him, I protested. Dozens of times. Victoria looked up through her tears, her voice barely a whisper. I know. I was filtering his calls. I told him you never tried to contact him. The room went silent. Even Uncle Robert stopped his muttering about contesting the will. You what? I stared at my sister in disbelief. I thought if you two made up, he'd change his mind about leaving me the company. I thought I was protecting my future. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I never thought he'd find out. I never thought he'd leave you everything. The weight of 5 lost years crashed over me like a tidal wave. 5 years of believing my father hated me, of thinking I'd destroyed our relationship forever. 5 years of missed birthdays, holidays, opportunities to reconcile. Victoria, I said quietly, you stole 5 years from us. 5 years we could have had together. I know, she sobbed. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thompson cleared his throat gently. Michael, there's one more thing. Your father left instructions for me to tell you that he was proud of the man you became, and that he hoped you could find it in your heart to forgive an old fool who let his pride get in the way of loving his son. I put my head in my hands, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't even name. Grief, anger, relief, confusion, all swirling together in a storm that threatened to tear me apart. What happens now? I asked. Now, Thompson said, you have some very big decisions to make. I sat alone in my rental car in the law office parking garage for 2 hours after everyone else left, staring at the envelope containing my father's private letter. My hands were shaking too badly to open it. $8.7 million. Controlling interest in a construction company worth tens of millions more. Everything I'd ever dreamed of having the power to change, handed to me by the man who'd spent 5 years pretending I didn't exist. My phone had been buzzing nonstop. Lisa had called 6 times, my best friend Tony twice, and there were several missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably reporters. The Hamilton family drama would make excellent fodder for the business pages. Finally, I tore open the envelope. The letter was written in my father's careful handwriting, the same script I remembered from birthday cards before our falling out. Michael, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you now know the truth about everything. I hope you can forgive your old man for being too stubborn and proud to tell you while I was alive. You were right about the environmental issues. You were right about the safety protocols. You were right about everything, and I was too set in my ways to admit it. After you left, I spent months angry at you for embarrassing me, for challenging my authority. But gradually, I started paying attention to the news stories you've been trying to show me. The lawsuits against construction companies. The environmental disasters. The workers getting sick from exposure to toxic materials. I realized that you hadn't been trying to destroy our family business. You've been trying to save it. I wanted to call you so many times over the years. I picked up the phone more times than I can count. But I didn't know how to say I was sorry without admitting I'd been wrong about everything. You know me well enough to know how hard that would have been for me. 6 months ago, when the doctors told me about the cancer, I finally found the courage to change things. I started implementing the protocols you'd suggested. I hired an environmental compliance officer. I began the process of cleaning up the messes I'd made over the years. But I also realized I needed to make sure the company would be in the right hands when I was gone. Victoria is smart and capable, but she doesn't have your principles. She doesn't have your courage to do the right thing when it's difficult. I need you to know that the last 5 years weren't your fault. They were mine. I failed as a father when I chose my ego over my son. I failed as a businessman when I chose shortcuts over sustainability. I failed as a man when I chose pride over love. I'm leaving you the company and the estate because I believe you're the only one who can make them into what they should be. But more than that, I'm leaving them to you because you're my son, and despite my failures, I love you more than words can express. I know this is a tremendous responsibility, and I know you may not want it. If you decide to sell everything and use the money for your environmental work, I'll understand. If you decide to try to run the company according to your principles, I'll be proud of you from wherever I am. But whatever you decide, please know that you were always the son I hoped you would be. I was just too foolish to see it until it was too late. I love you, Michael. I'm sorry I never found a way to say that while it mattered. Your father, Charles. I was crying before I finished the first paragraph. By the end, I could barely see the words through my tears. I read it twice more, then folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. My phone rang again. This time it was Victoria. Michael. Her voice was small, uncertain. Can we talk? I'm not sure there's anything left to say. Please. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to explain. I need to try to make this right somehow. I closed my eyes, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the day. Where are you? There's a coffee shop called Annie's Kitchen on Main Street, about 10 minutes from the law office. Could you meet me there? 20 minutes later, I walked into a cozy diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Victoria was sitting in a corner booth, still in her black suit but looking somehow smaller than she had in the conference room. Her perfect makeup was gone, washed away by hours of crying. Thank you for coming, she said as I slid into the seat across from her. The waitress, a motherly woman in her 60s, appeared instantly. What can I get you folks? Just coffee, I said. Same, Victoria added. When we were alone again, Victoria stared down at her hands for a long moment before speaking. I need you to understand something, she began. I didn't keep you from Dad because I'm some kind of monster. I did it because I was terrified. Terrified of what? Of being alone. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but sincere. You always had this certainty about who you were and what you believed in. Even when we were kids, you knew what was right and wrong and you never wavered. But I never had that. I defined myself entirely by what other people thought of me, by how much they valued me. The waitress returned with our coffee. Victoria wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to warm herself from the inside out. When you left, I suddenly became the only child. For the first time in my life, I had Dad's complete attention and approval. He relied on me. He trusted me with the business. He made me feel important. She took a shaky breath. I was so afraid that if you came back, I'd go back to being invisible. You were never invisible, Victoria. Dad loved you. Did he? Or did he love the idea of having a daughter who would never challenge him, never question his decisions, never make him uncomfortable by pointing out his mistakes? She laughed bitterly. You know what's funny? I spent 5 years trying to be the perfect daughter, doing everything exactly the way he wanted, and in the end he still chose you. Because deep down, he respected you more than he ever respected me. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her she was wrong. But another part of me wondered if she might be right. I'm not trying to excuse what I did, she continued. Keeping you apart from Dad was wrong and I know that. But I need you to understand that I wasn't doing it out of malice. I was doing it out of fear. Fear doesn't justify stealing 5 years from us, Victoria. 5 years we could have spent rebuilding our relationship. 5 years Dad and I will never get back. I know. Fresh tears started flowing down her cheeks. I know, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. But Michael, there's something else you need to know. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. What's that? It's everything Dad left me. Not the house in Malibu or the cars. The important stuff. She pushed the folder across the table to me. Letters he wrote but never sent. Photos he kept on his desk. Newspaper clippings about your environmental work. He had this whole file about you, Michael. He followed your career obsessively. With trembling hands I opened the folder. On top was a newspaper article from 2 years ago about the toxic waste cleanup I'd organized in Queens. In the margins, someone had written in my father's handwriting, "That's my boy." Underneath were dozens of other articles, photos from my college graduation that I didn't even know existed, and a stack of handwritten letters all addressed to me but never sent. I opened the first one, dated just 3 months after our fight. Michael, I've been thinking about what you said and I'm starting to wonder if maybe you were right about some things. I hired an independent environmental consultant to look at our practices. You might be interested to know that. I couldn't read any further. The irony was too painful. While I'd been agonizing over our broken relationship, he'd been trying to bridge the gap in the only way he knew how, by taking action on the issues I'd raised. He loved you so much, Michael, Victoria whispered. And he was so proud of you. I knew that, and I kept you away from him anyway because I was selfish and scared. I closed the folder, unable to process any more revelations. What do you want from me, Victoria? Forgiveness? Because I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to know the truth. She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly before pulling back. "And I want you to know that whatever you decide to do with the company, with the estate, I'll support you. I'll even help you if you'll let me." "Help me do what?" "Run Hamilton Construction the way Dad should have run it from the beginning. The way you wanted him to run it 5 years ago." Her voice grew stronger, more determined. "I know the business inside and out. I know all the employees, all the clients, all the ongoing projects. And I know I can never make up for what I've done, but maybe I can help you build something good from the wreckage I helped create." I studied my sister's face, looking for any sign of manipulation or hidden agenda. But all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and something that looked like genuine hope. "I don't know if I'm even going to keep the company," I admitted. "This is all so overwhelming. 24 hours ago, I was a nobody working for an environmental nonprofit in Brooklyn. Now I'm supposed to be some kind of business mogul? You're not a nobody, Michael. You're exactly the kind of person who should be running a company like this. Someone who cares more about doing the right thing than making a quick profit." She managed a small smile. "Dad saw that even if it took him 5 years to admit it. But I don't know anything about running a construction business." "I do. And Frank Morrison does. And we both believe in what you were trying to do 5 years ago." Victoria leaned forward, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked like the determined businesswoman I remembered from our childhood. "We could do this together, Michael. We could build the kind of company Dad always wanted to build but never had the courage to create." I stared out the window at the late afternoon Connecticut sky, weighing everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, my biggest problem was figuring out how to pay my student loans. Now I was being offered the chance to transform an entire industry, to prove that you could be profitable and responsible at the same time. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Victoria stood up and left a $20 bill on the table. "But Michael, whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm proud to be your sister. I always have been, even when I was too jealous and scared to show it." As she walked away, I remained in the booth, staring at the folder of my father's secret correspondence and trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Hamilton Construction's headquarters, looking out at the biggest gamble of my life. The table was surrounded by environmental consultants, sustainability experts, union representatives, and several potential clients who were interested in what we were calling the Hamilton model. Victoria sat to my right, no longer the bitter, jealous woman from the funeral, but not quite the sister I remembered from childhood either. We were still figuring out how to be family again, how to work together despite the weight of our shared history. But we were trying, and that felt like progress. Frank Morrison sat across from us, his weathered face showing a mixture of excitement and anxiety that I'd come to recognize as his default expression since I'd taken over the company. At 62, he'd been my father's partner for over 20 years, but he'd embraced our new direction with the enthusiasm of a man half his age. "All right, everyone," I began, standing up to address the room. 6 months ago, Hamilton Construction was just another mid-sized construction company cutting corners to maximize profits. Today, we're about to sign our biggest contract ever with the state of Connecticut to build affordable housing that meets the highest environmental standards in the country. A murmur of approval went around the table. The project was ambitious: 200 units of affordable housing that would be carbon neutral, built with sustainable materials, and designed to provide long-term cost savings for the families who would live there. "It hasn't been easy getting here," I continued. "We've had to completely overhaul our supply chain, retrain our workers, and prove to skeptical clients that environmental responsibility doesn't have to mean budget-breaking costs." I looked around the table at the faces of people who had believed in our vision when most of the industry thought we were crazy. Dr. Sarah Chin, our head of environmental compliance, had left a prestigious job at an engineering firm to help us develop new construction methods. Miguel Torres, our union representative, had worked with us to create training programs that gave construction workers new skills in green building techniques. Jennifer Walsh from the State Housing Authority had taken a huge political risk by championing our bid. "But the real test isn't just whether we can complete this project," I said. "It's whether we can prove that this model is sustainable and profitable enough to change how the entire industry operates." Victoria stood up, consulting her tablet. "I'm happy to report that despite our increased costs in materials and training, our profit margins have actually improved over the past 6 months. It turns out that when you build things right the first time, you spend a lot less money on repairs and liability issues." Frank nodded approvingly. "Plus, we're seeing increased demand from clients who want to work with a company that shares their values." The millennials and Gen Z buyers coming into the market don't just want a house. They want to feel good about how that house was built. Dr. Chin leaned forward. And the environmental impact data is even better than we projected. The pilot homes we completed last month are using 40% less energy than comparable conventional construction, and the indoor air quality measurements are off the charts. What about the workers? Asked Miguel. Are they adapting to the new methods? Better than we expected, Victoria replied. The training programs have been so successful that other companies are trying to poach our people. We're actually having to offer retention bonuses to keep our best workers. I felt a surge of pride and satisfaction. This was what I dreamed of 5 years ago when I tried to convince my father to change direction. This was why I'd been willing to sacrifice my relationship with my family. There is one issue we need to discuss, I said, my tone becoming more serious. 3 of our competitors have filed complaints with the state licensing board, claiming that our environmental standards are an unfair competitive advantage. Jennifer Walsh rolled her eyes. Let me guess. Peterson Construction, Morrison Associates, and Hamilton's former biggest rival, Bradshaw Industries. That's right. They're arguing that if we're allowed to market ourselves as environmentally responsible, they should be held to the same standards, which they claim would put them out of business. So they want to either force us to lower our standards or force them to raise theirs, Frank said grimly. Classic industry response to innovation. Actually, Dr. Chin said with a slight smile, this might work in our favor. If the state licensing board decides that environmental standards should apply to everyone, we'll have a huge competitive advantage because we've already made the transition. But what if they decide the other way? Victoria asked. What if they rule that we can't market our environmental standards because it creates an unfair advantage? Then we take it to the media, I said. We make this a public issue about whether the people of Connecticut deserve to know which construction companies are working to protect their environment and which ones are fighting to keep polluting. Miguel nodded approvingly. The unions will support you on that. Our members are tired of being exposed to toxic materials just because it's cheaper for the companies. We spent the next hour working through the details of our strategy, but I found myself thinking about something larger than just this one fight. We weren't just building houses or even just changing an industry. We were proving that you could succeed in business without compromising your values, that profit and principle didn't have to be mutually exclusive. After the meeting, Victoria and I walked out to the parking lot together. It had become our routine over the past few months, these brief conversations at the end of each workday where we tried to rebuild the relationship we'd lost. You know, she said as we reached our cars, I think Dad would be proud of what we've built here. I looked back at the Hamilton Construction Building, where lights were still on in several offices as our team worked late to prepare for the next phase of the housing project. I hope so. Sometimes I wonder if I'm honoring his memory or completely destroying everything he worked for. You're transforming it into something better, Victoria said firmly. And that's exactly what he wanted you to do, even if he couldn't admit it while he was alive. Speaking of transforming things, I said, I've been thinking about the Connecticut estate. Victoria raised an eyebrow. What about it? The estate was a sprawling property in Litchfield County that had been in our family for 3 generations. 37 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, with a main house that had 12 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and more square footage than any reasonable person could ever need. I don't want to live there, I said. It's beautiful, but it's not me. All that space, all that grandeur, it feels like living in a museum. So what are you thinking? I want to turn it into something useful. Maybe a training center for sustainable construction techniques. Or a retreat center for environmental organizations. Something that serves a purpose beyond just being an expensive house where I'd rattle around alone. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if I'd hurt her feelings by dismissing the family home so casually. Actually, she said slowly, I think that's a brilliant idea. But what if we made it even bigger? What do you mean? What if we turned it into a conference center specifically focused on sustainable business practices? We could host seminars, workshops, networking events. We could bring together business leaders, environmental experts, policy makers. We could make it a hub for the kind of change we're trying to create. I stared at my sister, impressed despite myself. That's actually a really good idea. We could use the guest houses for overnight stays, turn the ballroom into a conference space. And the grounds are perfect for outdoor team-building exercises and environmental education programs, Victoria continued, warming to the idea. We could partner with universities, think tanks, maybe even government agencies. It would be expensive to convert, I pointed out. But it would also generate revenue eventually. And more importantly, it would create a lasting legacy for what Dad started and what we're trying to finish. I felt that familiar surge of excitement I got when a good idea began to take shape. We'd need to hire an event planning team, maybe partner with some established organizations to get started. I actually know someone who might be perfect for that, Victoria said. Remember Jenny Martinez from high school? She's been running corporate retreats for a consulting firm in Boston. I heard she's looking for a change. Jenny Martinez, who beat us both in the debate tournament our senior year? That's the one. If anyone could talk corporate executives into caring about the environment, it would be her. We stood there in the parking lot for a few more minutes, brainstorming possibilities for the estate. It struck me that this was the first time since we were children that Victoria and I had collaborated on something purely creative, something that excited both of us without any underlying competition or resentment. "There's something else I need to tell you," I said as we prepared to leave. "What's that?" "Lisa and I got engaged last week." Victoria's face lit up with genuine happiness. "Michael, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. She's perfect for you. She wants to meet you properly. I mean, she met you at the funeral, but under the circumstances. I'd love that. Maybe we could have dinner this weekend? I could cook or we could go somewhere nice." I smiled at the eagerness in her voice. Victoria had been trying so hard over the past 6 months to rebuild our relationship, and I could see how much my approval meant to her. She'd like that. Fair warning though, she's probably going to grill you about your intentions toward her fiancé's business empire. Victoria laughed. "I can handle Lisa. The question is, can she handle being married to someone who's about to revolutionize an entire industry?" "She's the one who convinced me to take the risk in the first place," I admitted. "When I first inherited everything, I was ready to sell it all and donate the money to environmental causes. She's the one who pointed out that I could probably do more good by actually running the company than by just writing checks." Smart woman. The smartest. As I drove home to Brooklyn that evening, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I'd been a struggling environmental advocate working for a nonprofit that could barely afford to pay my salary. I'd been estranged from my family, bitter about the past, and convinced that business and environmental responsibility were fundamentally incompatible. Now I was engaged to the woman I loved, rebuilding my relationship with my sister, and running a company that was proving every day that you could be profitable and principled at the same time. More than that, we were creating a model that other companies were starting to follow, whether they wanted to or not. My phone rang as I hit traffic on the Merritt Parkway. Lisa's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, how did the big meeting go?" she asked. "Better than I hoped. We signed the contract, dealt with some competitor complaints, and Victoria and I came up with an idea for the estate." "Tell me everything." I spent the rest of the drive filling her in on the day's events. Lisa had become my sounding board for all the major decisions, the person who helped me think through the implications of each choice. She understood better than anyone how overwhelming it had been to go from struggling nonprofit worker to CEO overnight. "I'm proud of you," she said when I finished. "You've taken something that could have been just about money and power and turned it into something that actually matters. I couldn't have done it without you. Or Victoria, as much as it surprises me to say that. People can change, Michael. Your sister made terrible choices, but she's trying to make up for them now. That has to count for something." "I know. It's just hard sometimes trusting her after what she did." "Trust has to be rebuilt slowly," Lisa said. "But from what you've told me, she's doing everything she can to earn it back." "She is. And honestly, the company wouldn't be where it is today without her business expertise. I may have the vision and the environmental knowledge, but she knows how to make things actually happen in the corporate world." "Sounds like you two make a good team." "Yeah, we do." Finally. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt lighter than I had in months. The legal challenges from our competitors were still ahead of us, and there would undoubtedly be other obstacles as we continued to grow and change the industry. But for the first time since inheriting my father's legacy, I felt truly confident that we were building something that would last, something that would make a real difference in the world. I pulled out my father's letter and read it one more time, as I'd done every night for the past 6 months. The words that had once brought me to tears now brought me comfort and determination. "I love you, Michael. I'm sorry I never found a way to say that while it mattered." "It still matters, Dad," I said quietly to the empty apartment. "And I'm going to make sure it always will." The next morning brought news that would change everything once again. Victoria called me at 6 a.m., her voice tight with excitement and anxiety. "Michael, you need to get to the office. Now." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. We just got a call from the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. They want to meet with us about implementing the Hamilton model in federal housing projects nationwide. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Nationwide. Nationwide. They've been watching our Connecticut project, and they want to discuss a pilot program that could affect thousands of units of federal housing. That's exactly what we've been working toward, Victoria finished. The chance to prove that our model can work on a massive scale. As I got dressed and prepared to drive back to Connecticut, I thought about the conversation I'd had with my father 5 years ago, the fight that had torn our family apart. He'd accused me of being naive, of not understanding how the real world worked. Maybe he'd been right about me being naive. But sometimes naive idealism was exactly what the world needed. Sometimes you had to believe that change was possible before you could make it happen. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got the chance to prove that doing the right thing wasn't just morally correct, it was also the smartest business decision you could make. The Hamilton model was about to go national, and I couldn't wait to see what we could build together.